run a school called the National Claims Institute. I also have a YouTube channel called Listen to This Bull. We talk about bullshit in the insurance world. It's a lot of fun. We got about 50 or so different 10, 15-minute videos on the YouTube channel that are instructional about how different parts of the policy are supposed to actually work in real life, not the bullshit that they feed us. So, I teach a class called Dealing with Engineers. This is a portion of that class that really talks about how the whole issue has developed, how engineers have been effective against us for a while, and by knowing the problem fully, we can understand the solution. And it's not a hard solution. I studied aerospace engineering at a school called Embry-Riddle. It's a 5-year program. I did 4 years, and then I quit because apparently in order to design aircraft, you have to start off for the first 70 years designing tiny little small parts of it to withstand certain pressures and stresses. And that sounds boring as fuck. So I didn't do that. Started a company called All Good Roof Systems right after the economy crashed in 2007. We were very small. I knocked on doors. I was a roofing sales guy. I hated knocking on doors. I really wasn't very good at that part. So I got a partner to knock on the doors while I got up and did all the technical shit. I was good at the sales. I just sucked at the door knocking portion of it. At some point, I realized that I was really good at dealing with the insurance companies and my peers weren't, so I started a public adjusting firm called All Good Adjustments. All Good Adjustments in Georgia, which I will say is probably the hardest state in the nation to work in. I know I'm standing in Illinois right now. Illinois is very similar, but I would still argue that Georgia's a little bit tougher. We became the largest PA firm in Georgia. We were doing roughly 3,000 claims a year, mostly small residential roof claims. At some point, we did strictly large laws for financial purposes, sold my company to another PA firm, and that allowed us to start the school, National Claims Institute, which is located in Florida. I don't know who put that last one up there. I mean, it couldn't have been me. So weird that it's up there.
Yeah, it might have went to my other admin.
If you guys feel the need to come up and touch me or something, please wait until after. Okay? I know it's hard.
Claims.
Well, not that. That's not hard. Not right now. A little disclaimer, I'm not an attorney. I'm going to say some shit up here that's going to sound an awful lot like I'm giving you legal advice. You just misheard me. So that's your fault. All right, so how many of you guys have ever dealt with an engineer before?
Yeah.
Insurance carrier hired an engineer, not one that you hired.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, a lot of you? What happens after they hire the engineer? What's the result?
I mean, I haven't been named on them yet, but
It's denied? But wait a minute.
next year I'll probably
They
start
sent out an engineer. Obviously, they're going to do a really thorough investigation. They're a fucking
getting
engineer,
IAUA certified,
right?
and I'm plan certified as an appraiser.
It's a problem. They use these third parties in such a way that it allows them to be insulated from bad faith. They have to have some kind of a reason for their claims decision, and that reason can't be their own reason. They have to rely on an expert. That expert can say whatever they want. And as long as it's someone else that's saying it, then the carrier has a reasonable explanation for their decision. And because it's reasonable for their denial, that basis, they get away with whatever that expert says. So all they have to do is control what that expert says, possibly, and then they can have a reasonable explanation for that denial and kind of avoid a bad faith scenario. I mean, it is reasonable. They hire someone called a forensic engineer. Are there any forensic engineers in the room? John Pruitt just talked. Where'd he go? Is he an engineer? He's gone. Fucker. All right. I sat through his shit. Hell. All right, whatever. What is a forensic engineer? Does anybody know? Has anybody ever known one? It's not a real thing. It's a made-up term. You don't go to school to become a forensic engineer. You go to school to become a structural engineer, mechanical engineer, software engineer. You don't go to school to become a forensic engineer. You become a forensic engineer by saying that this is the area of study that you're going to stay in. It's kind of like being a divorce lawyer. You don't go to school for divorce lawyering. You go to school to become a lawyer, and then you become a divorce lawyer. So a forensic engineer, according to one of the forensic engineer websites, investigation of property loss and injuries related to failure in materials, components, design, and structures. Forensic engineer is typically a qualified mechanical, electrical, civil, chemical, environmental, or materials engineer. So there's not really any classes to go to become a forensic engineer or even really to learn about that. There's like Hague engineering classes. Anybody here Hague certified? Yeah, I'm sorry. Me too. These engineers, they get hired, they go take the same 3-day course that you can take for $750, and suddenly they're a forensic engineer. And they get to do all the things that Hague does. And they're competent, I guess. Does that sound right? Doesn't really sound right. Sounds like bullshit. But there is some competency concerns there. If they're not competent in something, and I'm going to show you a little bit later in the statutes, they're not allowed to do any part of that project that they're not competent in. But they're engineers, which sounds super impressive. I mean, there is not a single person on this planet that is smarter than an engineer. There's no way in hell he's going to do anything wrong. If an engineer told you that your baby was green? Green. Your baby's green. You'd probably be like, shit, an engineer would know. That makes sense. It sounds super impressive. Does an engineer actually have more competency for if a roof is repairable than a roofer? No. Why are we asking an engineer to determine if something is repairable? That makes no sense. But to a layman, it sounds like they're putting the right person on the job. What sounds better? Mr. Homeowner, I'm the adjuster from the insurance carrier. Mr. Homeowner, we're going to send out one of our preferred roofers out to take a look at your roof to see if it's repairable. Or, Mr. Homeowner, we're going to send an engineer out to your property to investigate fully so we can make sure that we have the proper coverages applied. Engineer sounds better. Automatically. They're super impressive. If you want to get all the women, be an engineer. Probably, right? Yeah, I think so. I didn't finish, so I don't know for sure. Well, I did 4 of the 5 years. A lot of times they're asked to make some opinions that they're not really qualified to make. They might be asked to make opinions on weather data. You know, they're engineers, so sounds like they should know how to interpret weather data. But they're not actually meteorologists. The key here is that it sounds reasonable to a jury that someone like this that has an engineering degree probably has all the scientific knowledge necessary to be able to make an opinion statement about anything that's science-y related. Because they're a fucking engineer. And it sounds impressive. No one really knows what an engineer does anyway, right? They're just out there engineering things, I guess. I don't know what they do. Can an engineer determine what materials can be intermixed with other materials? Maybe, if they do testing on it. Does it make sense that an engineer would say what is like, kind, and quality to another item? Is like, kind, and quality a policy term? Are they asking the engineer to interpret policy language without really defining it for them? Have you ever seen the definition of like, kind, and quality? Does that exist in any policy at all? It does not. So it's an ambiguous term. So it could be broad, it could be narrow, it could be anything. Whatever benefits the policyholder the most for most states. but they have an engineer. How many of you have seen a Donan article about the Atlas Chalet where they say, oh, there's these 4 like kind of quality items? Why the fuck would an engineer know what is like kind of quality according to a policy? They wouldn't. It wasn't even an engineer that wrote that, by the way. And he doesn't work for Donan anymore. And he took that article with him, and he can't get it. But they still pass that thing around. It's really strange. You too, Steve? Man. You too, Brute. It's all right. Bye, Steve. So engineers are asked to do something. Sometimes they call this their scope of work. Sometimes they call it their assignment. I don't know why my slide got squished here. It's kind of weird. Wasn't always like that. Probably jumped in a cold pool. Whatever it is that they're being specifically asked to do, that's called their assignment, their scope of work. This is something that's very, very important. Because if it has nothing to do with what the disagreement is, then it's pointless for them to go out and do it. How many of you are asking the engineers what their specific assignment is? How many of you are asking the adjuster what it is before the engineer even goes out? Handful of you? Is that important to know, you think? Possibly. What if they don't do what they've been asked to do and they do something completely different? The engineers don't know what they're specifically asked to do? They just show up? I have not had that experience. That's interesting. Really? Wow. Let's figure it out together, I guess. Yeah. Wow.
Desk adjuster sent out an engineer. Foundation damage.
Louisiana. Okay. That actually makes a little more sense suddenly, strangely. You got to find out what it is they're being asked to do because sometimes they might not be qualified to make an opinion statement about that. They're acting outside their competency. How many of you guys find out who the engineer is before they're sent out? Do you get a copy of their CV? Yeah? Do you call them and vet them?
You know, they're never an engineer.
They're never an engineer for you.
Never once have I ever had an engineer assigned to an engineer inspection until I point out that they're not an engineer.
Who do they send out? Hancock?
Pretty much, yeah.
USAA used to say that Hancock was their engineering firm. They were saying that to us in Georgia for a while. It's like, they're not engineers. Yes, they are. I'm sorry, ma'am. They really aren't. But you can send them out instead of an engineer, that's fine.
Vet the CG and ask every homeowner when calls to the adjuster because we're not allowed to contact.
You know, sometimes they don't want to give you this kind of information, but it's important to try to grab it. If you ask for something and they don't give it to you and it's reasonable that you've asked for it, at least you've documented that you've asked for it. And now if it ends up in an attorney's hands, it looks a lot less likely that they've been acting in good faith. It's a good negotiating tool. The fact that they are ignoring reasonable requests is important to document. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
So is it a reasonable request to vet someone that they're sending out as an expert beforehand? Of course it is. You can call the engineer. Say, hey, Mr. Engineer, I heard you're on my claim. The adjuster told me that they are going to have you identify the extent of hail damage on the roof. Did they happen to tell you what the thresholds for damage were from the policy? Yeah, I kind of figured they wouldn't. Hague says that they don't want the definition of damage from the carrier, which is really interesting with some of the slides I'm about to show you, because for whatever reason they say that that makes them biased. It's going to bias their decision. Does that make any sense? Knowing what the threshold from your client is on whether or not something is damaged and being asked to identify if something was meeting this threshold, does that bias someone's opinion? No. It doesn't make any fucking sense. But that's what they say. Engineers often use terms the way that engineers use those terms. Go figure. And adjusters use terms the way that adjusters use terms. This is called jargon. You know, every industry has its own jargon. It might be a set of terms that they use and it means something different for that industry. When you see an engineer report, has anybody ever had this in an engineer report? I found damage that was inconsistent with wind. Anybody ever seen something like that? Inconsistent with hail. What does that mean to a layman? It's not hail, it's not wind. And so the adjuster says, engineer said it wasn't consistent with wind, no damage caused by wind, no coverage. Well, what the engineer is actually saying is, that's weird. It's not what I expected. It's inconsistent with what I expected to see if it was wind typically. It doesn't mean it's not wind. It's just not what I expected. That's what engineer speak is for inconsistent. It's exactly what it would be if you were to look up the definition. When an engineer says expected service life, what does that mean? All right, if you've got, I do roofs as an example for this class for most everything because more people do roofs than anything else. So if you're not into roof claims, I apologize. They're just easier at examples. Asphalt architectural shingles. What is the expected service life? 30, 20, 25? I mean, what do you base this on? Is it warranty level? Because if it's warranty level, they're going to last forever because they have a lifetime warranty. Not like lifetime, like when you go to jail, you get life. I think that's 20 years, so maybe it's not really that. If you had an architectural shingle that was rated for 35 years before it became lifetime, now it's a lifetime shingle, does that mean its expected service life is 35 years? Is it? You know, the manufacturers don't actually label expected service life and put a number down on their products. They don't do that. They just warrant it for a certain amount of time. Is a 35-year product going to last the same amount of time in Florida as it does in Michigan? Different climate, different amount of sun, might be salt in the air. It dries out like crazy in Florida and they last half the amount of time. Is the expected service life for that product different in Florida than Michigan? It makes sense that it would be, but they don't tell us that. What they do tell us is it hasn't reduced the expected service life. Motherfucker, you haven't even told me what shingle it is. How do you know if it has reduced its expected service life? You don't know. You don't even know the manufacturer of this thing. But they say this shit. They use their own terms. Sometimes those terms mean different things than what the policy would have those terms mean. Do you think that the term wear and tear means the same thing to an engineer as it does to an insurance policy? Yeah? So, obviously I was looking for a no. You could get that out of context clues probably. I don't know if you said yes. It kind of sounded like you said, yep. Yes. Yes. Does anybody know what mechanical damage is? Anyone? Damage. I went to a windstorm conference, and at the windstorm conference they have adjusters from the carrier side and public adjusters at the same conference. And in the expo center, it's nothing but engineer firms and attorneys. It's really a surreal experience going into nothing but attorneys and engineers. But I asked 8 different engineers what mechanical damage was, and I got 4 different answers. 4 of them said, I don't know what you're talking about. Can you explain to me what it is? Vandalism is mechanical damage. Tool damage caused by tools, dropping tools. Man-made forces, man-made damage. I think I'm getting that one wrong suddenly. And then one was damage caused by another object hitting an object or an item. In a deposition with Hague, one of the minority owners of Hague, it was said that, or this guy said that hail could cause mechanical damage. Go figure. So it's not hail damage, it's mechanical damage. But was it mechanical damage caused by hail? They don't always say that second part. Mechanical damage, by the way, not excluded in an open peril policy. You won't find it. what you'll get is the denial letter with the entire exclusion section. You'll be like, hey, so which one is it? And they'll be like, we think it's clear. It's not clear. You sent me the whole exclusion section. I can't find the word mechanical in this anywhere. Can you please be a little bit more clear? We think it's clear. When they start saying shit like that, it's probably means you're hitting that point where they don't want to set a precedent. They're going to push you to litigation. You could probably make a compromise settlement out of that if you try, possibly. Physical damage means something different to an engineer than it does to an insurance policy. Insurance policy doesn't define damage in section 1, right? So what's direct physical loss, direct physical damage? Does anybody know the actual definition?
Yeah.
Insurance policies don't define it, so it's an ambiguous term, broad for the benefit of the policyholder. It could be anything that's damaged. In fact, courts of law across the nation have defined direct physical damage or direct physical loss for us. I've got that in a slide coming up. It means any kind of actual physical damage. Damage is something that's detrimental. It didn't get better because the hail hit it. The hail hit it and whoa, it's made of gold now. That'd be amazing. Damage means something different. Consistent means something different. Wear and tear. I have seen one policy ever that almost defined wear and tear. It's from a Farmer Smart Plan. Farmer Smart Plan in the policy notices, not inside the policy, but in the notices where they say this is how you're supposed to read our policy, it said, remember, we do not owe for wear and tear. So if your roof was required to be completely replaced prior to the loss, then we would not owe for it. That's not how they apply wear and tear at all. That means the roof has failed already because of age. Not that it has some age, that it has failed because of age. That's how the cause of loss of wear and tear actually works. But they don't define it. Footfall damage. It's technically mechanical damage. It's also not excluded by open peril policies. You ever filed a claim for footfall? I have. It's very fun. Freaks them out. It's direct physical loss. Now, the hard part is proving that it all happened in a singular event. If you can prove that, because, you know, the insurance company sent out 15 different people for this one roof, and they all got out at the same time. It happened to be the same day of the inspection that they were all out there. Football. I don't know why engineers would ever define proximate cause, but sometimes they do. Insurance companies will ask engineers to do things in certain ways. They can use certain language. They can use certain sentences. They cannot use certain language. They cannot use certain sentences. If they say certain things, it leads the insured to believe that there might be some coverages. So you can't say those things. You can only say the things that allow us to misinterpret it accidentally, possibly, maybe. There's a list of approved terms, and there's a list of terms that they're not supposed to use. I filed a claim, well, no, I didn't file this one. I was given a claim once after it was filed for wind. There was a tornado that went by. It was a flat roof. It had a built-up tar and gravel roof with a mod bit laid over top of it. And they filed for wind because the tornado went by like 50 feet away. Makes sense they filed for wind. The interior of this building was leaking everywhere. Engineer came out before I got there and said that it's wear and tear. And then I was called out, took a look at the policy. I was looking for the ensuing loss provision specifically, and I found it, and ensuing loss provision was tied to both wear and tear and improper installation. But the roof that was on there, the mod bit, was only 5 years old, so I didn't think wear and tear would ever apply to that. So I got involved with that claim, and I asked the adjuster to have the engineer to meet me back out on site because I didn't believe it was wear and tear because the roof was less than 5 years old, which definitely got the engineer back out. The engineer came out, I was like, well, show me where the wind is. I was like, I don't see any wind damage. That made him pause for a second. It's like, I think that this is improper installation, not wear and tear. It's only 5 years old. And you could see in his eyes, that's one of the things I'm allowed to say. Yes, yeah, I think you're right. It does look like improper installation. Yeah, this mod bit, the mod bit was improperly installed. Just the mod bit. I kept saying the mod bit was improperly installed because if he said the roof was improperly installed in his report, it was going to cause me all kinds of hell. But because the mod bit was improperly installed in his report, then because of the ensuing loss provision tied to improper installation, the improper installation of the mod bit allowed or resulted in water damage to the substrate of the built-up tar and gravel roof underneath it. And so they had to agree, based on their policy language, that the substrate was damaged and it had to be replaced. How do we get the substrate out? Got to tear off all the roofs. So we got coverage for improper installation. It all depends on how you work things with engineers. They are very specific people. Sometimes you can get away with that. Most of the time, probably not. We got a lot of chimneys rebuilt and all good adjustments for improper installation of flashing on chimneys because of ensuing loss provisions. If you guys are curious about how that really works, I know ensuing loss is a little bit complex. We've got an advanced policy interpretation class that really digs into it. I also think I have some free videos on the Listen to This Bull platform for it too. So engineers are supposed to write this report, stamp it to say that they professionally agree with everything that's in this thing that they wrote supposedly, and then they send it off to peer review inside their own company. And there is a peer review person that will bounce it back to them. You ever had an engineer say, oh, I'll have the report in about 3 weeks, and then it's 4 months later before you finally get a copy of it? Obviously, they were going back and forth on what was going to be in there. It's rough. There was an engineer that used to work for Donan in Georgia, and he quit Donan. And I like to think it was because of me, but I don't know for sure. That could just be an ego thing. But he quit Donan and started his own firm doing stuff for public adjusters. And we didn't get him enough business. I tried really hard. But eventually, he had to work for another carrier-hired engineering firm. While he was working for us as a PA, his reports were great. And then I met him on site on a different claim where he was working for this other engineering firm. And I thought, yes, I know this guy. This is going to go great. Didn't even have to vet him. Didn't have to do any of that. I knew who it was. And of course, his report comes back with all the same bullshit he used to do when he was working for Donan. And I had to call the guy up and be like, dude, what the fuck? And he's like, man, they don't let me say stuff, and I have to provide for my family. I don't want to have to file a complaint against you. I really don't. I don't want to do that to you. But you need to help me get out of this situation, or I'm going to have to. I have to do my job. I have to look out for the policyholder. You understand I'm doing my job, right? Well, ask the adjuster to ask me to do something and then attach me to that email, and I won't wait for them to ask me to do it. I'll just do it right away as if they were asking me for it, and I'll just pretend later on that I thought it was him asking me to do it or something like that. And that's what we did, and we ended up getting pushed through. But they do things because they are forced into that situation. It's an ethical concern for sure. But sometimes we do things that we feel like we can justify. We all do. I'm going to skip to a different slide just because I'm getting ahead of myself here. You know, there's ethical concerns here. Humans believe that they're the good guys. Most people believe they're a good person. They're doing everything within their power, right? They can justify a lot of different ways all the actions that they had, but none of them really think that they are the bad guy. Does anybody here believe that that you are a bad person? There's always one. Yep. Of course you don't. We all think that we're heroes in here. Because we're PAs and we're out to kill the injustice. there are things that we do that probably isn't that ethical too. Let's pad the estimate because we're going to start up high and it's a negotiation. Of course you start high. It's not really ethical though. As a company, All Good Adjustments, we got most of our business from contractors. There was one contractor that sent us the most amount of work, and that contractor asked us to change our process all the time. And you know what? We bent a little bit for him because we got all the work from him. And if we lost that contractor, I'd have to fire people. And I'm responsible for their families. That's how I felt. And so we bent, and we bent. And eventually, it was too much, and we said no. And luckily, they didn't pull out on us. But you do things. It's inevitable. Is it wrong to steal? What if you can't purchase bread and there's an orphan right there and they're going to die if they don't get a bite to eat right now, and there's a loaf of bread on this table not being washed by anybody? You know it's not yours. Is it okay to give that bread to this child? Extreme. But it makes you think. You know, ethical concerns can be philosophical. There's always going to be some rationale that we can make. The engineers that we meet, they're not bad people. They're just not. They're people. And people do dumb shit sometimes. And they're going to do whatever it is that they feel like is necessary to be able to provide for their families. They're going to think they're doing everything within their own constraints. I can tell you this, from meeting with the vast majority of engineers that are out in the field, all of them also hate this situation. They also hate that they have to do this shit. They're sick and tired of it. They're pissed off. And they are dying on the inside and hoping that you can help them get things past their own management and their own peer reviewers. You got to help them get shit past. The only way to start that off is to allow them to know that you know what's going on without being a dick. Don't be a dick. All right, let's come back. In 1996, Hague published a paper that defined functional damage to roofing materials. Been defined as the diminution of water shedding capability or the reduction of the expected service life of a roofing material. We talked about expected service life already. If it's going to last 40 years, even though it's warranted for 15, but now it's actually going to only last 30 years because of the loss. Has it had a reduction of service life? Yes. Is it the reduction of the expected service life? I don't know, because no one knows what expected service life means, and it's never defined. Hail caused damage to an asphalt shingle and roofing is a rupture of the reinforcing mat or displacement of granules sufficient to expose underlying bitumen. That's how they wrote it in 1996. They changed it since then. In 2006, they came up with a new paper, and that bottom part, displacement of granules sufficient to expose underlying bitumen, is no longer functional damage unless it has also broken the mat. And they did that because they took this study, a white paper that they wrote, that they published in their own articles, it wasn't peer reviewed, and they built 10 different roofs, and they stuck them outside, and every year they would bring those roofs in, and they would fire different size hail at it with their hail slingshot thing that they made. And they would document what size hail it would take to cause functional damage, the way that they define that, to these roofs. So by the end of the 10-year program, they brought them inside. The oldest shingles were 11 years old. And they shot it. And the architectural shingle, it took 1 1/4 inch hail to cause damage to it. And the 3-tab shingle, it took 1 inch hail to cause damage to that. And now, as a whole industry, we get to see engineers writing the reports all the time. It takes 1 1/4 inch hail or larger to damage a sound architectural shingle. Or it takes 1 inch hail or larger to damage a sound 3-tab. These shingles were installed in 1996. Do they still make these shingles?
No.
No. Do we even know what shingles they were? No. They didn't put that in the report. For some fucking reason, they put cloth over top of these things when they stuck them outside, too. I can't figure that one out to save my life. These are rules of thumb. What if your roof is 15 years old? Does this report matter to it whatsoever? Nope. The oldest shingle was 11. So if your roof is 15, Of course it's going to have a different damage profile than the 11-year-old roof would. Why are we using a rule of thumb? Makes no sense. It's absolute bullshit. But it sounds right. Sound architectural shingle? What's a sound shingle? If it gets damaged at 15 years in a way that the 11-year-old roof wouldn't get damaged, that just means that it's the age of the roof that's allowing the damage to occur. So it's not damaged by hail, it's wear and tear. And that's how they're figuring this shit out and calling it all wear and tear. Is it within its expected service life? I fucking hope so. If there's an architectural shingle out there that only lasts 15 years, you should not buy it. Here's Hague. An impact-generated fracture always is detectable in the bottom side of a shingle.
What? Wow.
I love it when they say always. When an engineer uses the term, a definitive term like that, you just know it's full of shit. A hailstone capable of dislodging granules and exposing the coating bitumen necessarily fractures the reinforcement of the shingle and generates a detectable bruise. It can't not do this. If it's capable of dislodging granules and exposing the coating bitumen, necessarily mean it can't not fracture the reinforcement of the shingle. When a shingle is struck by a hailstone dislodging granules and exposing coating bitumen while the underlying reinforcement remains intact, the shingle necessarily must be defective, or else is nearing or has exceeded its expected service life. There's no way that granule loss would occur on a shingle that doesn't have a broken mat unless it's old and it's wear and tear. This is a very telling statement from Hague. If shingles are aged to the point that they no longer have any remaining service life, or if they are defectively manufactured, they have no value. Now, there's no ACV value to this. No value. Does a roof have value even if it's old? How do we know that? If you were to buy a house without a roof, would it be worth more than a house with an old roof? No. The old roof would be worth more because it's not allowing water in. Hail falling on a roof with no value, therefore, cannot cause functional damage. That doesn't make any fucking sense. Do you guys know what the IBHS is? A little statement over here on the side. Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. It's an independent, nonprofit organization paid for by insurance carriers to do research on things. The insurance carriers pay for this. This is from them. There's 3 different types of damage profile for hail. One of those is a soft impact, when a hailstorm turns to slush upon impact. So it's not a rock-hard hailstone. In our heads, we're all thinking rock-hard hailstone is going to cause the most damage. Each of these damage types can reduce a shingle's functionality. Loss of granules exposes the asphalt to ultraviolet radiation, causing it to degrade and become more brittle with time and can reduce a shingle's fire resistance classification. This can shorten the useful life of an asphalt shingle roof system and potentially make it more susceptible to the next hailstorm. This is from IBHS. Guess what wasn't published? I mean, this technically was, but it's kind of hidden. I'll give you guys a copy of it later. In a Hague blog, casual use of the term damage, either cosmetic or functional, by an expert can have major implications depending on particular insurance policy. Because if we use the term damage, then they're going to have to provide coverage. So it could have major implications. It is not the role of the engineer or roof consultant to interpret an insurance policy or make coverage decisions. So we're not going to use the word damage. We'll use a different word. We'll say anomaly or condition. And we know that if this says there is a cosmetic condition or a cosmetic anomaly, then the adjuster is automatically going to think, well, that means damage, I'll apply coverage. Is that what happens? It's not what happens. Can you believe it? Those tasks are solely the role of the insurance adjuster. Instead, the expert should clearly state what the hail did and did not do. This is a very important line. The expert should clearly state what the hail did and did not do. If you're ever dealing with Hague, they never do that part. You should highlight that section from their Hague blog in September 2019 and send it to them, because they don't say what hail did or did not do. They'll just say there's some circular anomalies. And they don't say circular anomalies caused by hail. They leave that part out. So that's an important statement. If a client tasks an expert with answering a specific question, then the expert should answer that question as best as he or she can. For example, if the question is, did hail functionally damage the roof, then the client, that's the carrier, should advise the expert if there is a specific definition of functional damage that the carrier is using. If we take out the word functional and just make that damage, did hail damage the roof, then the client should advise the expert if there is a specific definition of damage. If there's no governing definition, the expert will be left to state their own definition. Why? If they're going to state their own definition, should it be a very broad definition or a very narrow one? For whatever reason, the engineering field has made a very narrow definition of functional damage. It's only when bruising, reduction of service life. Granule loss might not cause a reduction of expected service life, depending on how you define that. It might not reduce its water shedding capability, but it's still physically altered in a detrimental way. Is it damage? Unless the policy says otherwise, and there are plenty of endorsements that talk about what is covered and isn't. And they might have a cosmetic damage endorsement of some kind, some exclusions in there. They might have a marring exclusion. Farmer Smart Plan, for example, excludes marring, but later on in that same section it says, unless it's caused by hail or wind. Marring is buffing, scratching, tearing, not tearing, buffing, scratching, blemishes, shit like that. If the question is, was hail damage to a roof cosmetic or functional, then questions arise as to the definitions of both functional and cosmetic damage. If you don't give them the definition of functional and cosmetic damage from an insurance policy, then the engineer is supposed to come up with their own definitions according to Hague.
Okay.
If you ask the adjuster to tell the engineer what the definition of damage is, what will happen?
Does very well.
Awesome, man.
Hey, Cal, this is my
They're not going to tell them because there is no definition.
grandson's.
They're just going to tell you to pound sand. Why would they do that? They can't define something that's not defined in the policy. They'll have long-term consequences for their insurance carrier. If they suddenly define something that wasn't defined, now there's a precedent. They can't do that. Their legal department's not going to allow them to do that. You don't have to get them to do that. You just need to get them to say, instead of determine the extent of damage caused by hail to the property, you need to get them to add, determine the extent of cosmetic and functional damage caused by hail to the property. If you can get them to add both of those things, then the engineer is required to comment on both of them. You have to get the adjuster to ask the engineer to do that. Same blog. By clearly stating what hail did and did not do to the roof, and by avoiding the term damage, the inspector enables the insurance adjuster to perform his or her role of applying the policy. So they expect the adjuster to figure out what is meant by cosmetic condition or cosmetic anomaly, all by themselves applying the policy. It can't happen because those words aren't in the policy either. Several courts in various states have addressed the issue of what constitutes direct physical damage. In almost all cases thus far, courts have ruled that cosmetic changes in roofing materials caused by wind or hail are damage under the insurance policy. But wait a minute, that doesn't mean that cosmetic damages are covered damage. So we're going to keep saying it because it's not. We don't want to say damage. This is bullshit. They know, and it's in their blog that they know.
You don't need whatever. If you're judging me on based on how I look,
If you have a toilet backup and you want to have the best inspection possible, let's hire a licensed senior NASA vacuum toilet technician to determine the cause of loss, because that sounds impressive as fuck. This guy is from NASA. He knows everything. He works on the freaking space shuttle. Provide information about the trees that are close to the house for some reason. NASA man defines backup as sewage spilling out with a significant amount of fecal matter because he wasn't given a definition. NASA man determines that the root system is likely to have broken the underground pipes causing the backup. Had nothing to do with any of it, but it was an auxiliary thing that they could point to.
Setting an example. What do we do? We brought the
Conclusion says Cat 1 damage to floor since there's no sewage. Roots cause damage to underground plumbing. Underground plumbing has wear and tear. Underground plumbing has deficiencies in construction and or design. Damage is long term. Groundwater levels have been higher than normal in the area. Repairs can be made using towels and plunging the toilet using common industry accepted plunging methods.
fun of everything that we do because you think a different way that we do. We're very narrow minded. We think in 2 dimensions when they think in 3.
Common industry accepted plunging methods makes me laugh every time I say it out loud.
Interesting hearing.
This is an extreme example, but this is basically what's going on. There's no reason to hire a fucking engineer for what it is that we do most of the time. There's no reason. If there's structural damage, hire an engineer. If there's not structural damage, why are we doing this? It makes no sense. But when they are doing it, they're not giving them the proper definitions. They're allowing them to use terminology. If they're defining things as only functional damage, in the body they'll say functional damage is this. And in the conclusions, it won't say the property was not functionally damaged by hail. Instead, it will say the property was not damaged by hail. So they define damage as functional damage earlier on, and then they drop the word functional in the conclusions, and the engineers or the adjusters, they're reading only the conclusions. How many of you read the entire report? Good. You should, because there's gold inside those things. It's great. Engineers have to do things ethically. In fact, it's codified. There are laws that require them to act in an ethical manner, very specific ones. The National Society of Professional Engineers, NSPE for short, at all the NSPE meetings, they talk about the rules of practice. Engineers shall perform services only in the area of their competence. They're allowed to take on a project that has something that's being asked of them that's outside of their competence, as long as they get another person that is competent in that to do that portion of the project. But they cannot make opinion statements outside of their competency. How do we know if they're competent? Other than realizing they're half retarded about stuff, but they say that they're competent in something. But they could be challenged later on. In some states, they could be challenged directly beforehand, but not in all of them. They have to have technical knowledge or experience. They have to have been directly trained in some of these areas. So if they are giving some kind of an opinion statement over whether or not this storm data is more accurate or that storm data is more accurate, they're acting outside their competency if they don't have any meteorological training or they're not a meteorologist. So we could ask the engineer, hey, have you had any meteorological training? You know what? They're asking you to do something that is weather related. I hate it when they do this, don't you? It's like they really want you to act outside your competence for some reason. Tell you what, don't worry about that, Mr. Engineer. I'll call the adjuster in just a few minutes and ask them to hire a meteorologist for that portion of the report so you don't have to act outside your competency. I know it's kind of unfair of them to ask you that. I'll take care of that for you. Don't worry about it. I didn't even ask him if he was competent in it. Just let him know that I knew. And I'll take care of it. And I call the adjuster. Mr. Adjuster, I talked to the engineer. He and I both agreed that he'd probably be acting outside his competency if he's going to have to make some kind of opinion statement about whether or not a storm was capable of producing the hail or the wind in that area. It'd probably be better for you to hire a meteorologist for that portion of the assignment. If you'd like, I've got one that I could hire and have a report created right away. Adjuster's going to freak the fuck out. But what is he going to do? Engineers shall avoid all conduct or practice that deceives the public. They can't withhold information. They can't omit information. If you give them information, they have to present that as part of their report, especially if it's pertinent. If you give them a weather report and it doesn't show up in their report, all that shows up is a weather report given to them by the insurance carrier, that could be omitting information, withholding information. You want to give them all this shit. You want to give them everything, and you want to give it to them multiple times. You want to point out that you gave it to them as often as possible, so that there's a record of it. I gave you this. Why is it not in the report?
Yeah, fucking you on.
You want to follow an engineer around while they're taking photos, and you take a photo of them taking every photo? That'll freak them out. It's fun. Why did that photo not show up in your report? I have a photo of you taking a photo of that.
Yeah. Yeah. You taking off? Thanks, man.
They cannot use statements that contain a material misrepresentation of fact or omitting a material fact. They can't say things that purposely deceive the public. If they say hail did not damage the roof, but earlier on they were talking about how hail did not functionally damage the roof, then their statement where they dropped the word functional is an intentional deceit.
And yesterday I was trying to like run back.
Or at least it could be construed that way.
If I fucking sucked or not. Like, I'm on too many pain
If
meds
we
and
got
everything
them
like that.
to,
Pain.
the adjuster to ask the engineer to look for cosmetic and functional, then it wouldn't matter anymore. Now they have to make a comment on that because they're required to do what is asked of them. Here's the whole thing, I'm not gonna read through it. We just pointed out the big problem. There's terminology issues, there's competency issues, there's one thing that didn't appear in my slides, because I fucked up.
I had surgery when I was.
When they are asked to identify the cause of
This
loss,
one is the L4. I tried to fix it when I was.
they're being asked to identify a cause of loss.
Is it getting better, getting worse?
They didn't say causes. It wasn't plural.
And then about 3 weeks ago.
So when you're asked to identify the cause of loss,
over an hour to get up.
that's one.
Like, just, like,
One cause of loss, wear and tear, improper installation. I've had claims where the engineers put in the reports that there is deficient seals caused by age, wear and tear, deterioration,
you try to
all that
find
kind of shit.
something to do that doesn't
He failed to mention that the creases and missing shingles had to have occurred after the fact when an outside force lifted that shingle up. He didn't mention wind at all. He mentioned the proximate cause of loss, according to him, because that's only one cause of loss. Cause of loss that, according to this guy, started the chain of events off. But we all know, we're talking about concurrent causation.
I mean, I'm seeing a surgery.
We got two causes of loss acting concurrently with each other. One of them is covered, wind or hail, and the other one isn't, wear and tear, improper installation. If they name both of them, in the vast majority of states, the hail or the wind is still covered, regardless of the wear and tear or improper installation. In some states, depends on which one is the primary cause of loss. Texas. If you have concurrent causation, then generally speaking, for most states, you will have coverage. They just have to name all the causes of loss. So one of the things you can ask the adjuster to do is to ask the engineer to name all the causes of loss acting concurrently.
Hard, you know what I mean? It's hard.
Now they
It's
have
like-
to.
That's one thing too, like being in this
Name,
situation, a lot of situations.
instead of
Like, I'm just not
determine the extent of damage, it's determine the extent of cosmetic or functional.
I've had a lot of experiences like.
And instead of determining cause of loss, it's determine all the causes of loss.
Otherwise, my shit. should
Two
be
simple
different
changes.
ways, you know? And,
Reasonable
certain
things.
situations, I mean, you know, just is what it is, and I get it too, especially with the weight thing.
We know the problem fully.
Like easily, I can be 30, 40, 50, 60.
If we know the problem, then we can create the solution for it. And the solution is simple.
Work out, like, you know,
Both parties need to be aware of the other party's information discrepancies.
if I have cheese and crackers, I'm gonna eat them all.
Any defined items need to be given to the engineer. And the engineer needs to use those policy definitions. And if the insurer must give a very appropriate specific assignment to the engineer that uses those definitions or the lack thereof and broadens the assignment. Engineer has to identify anything they're incompetent in. Have you ever known an engineer that has ever made a repair on a roof?
So I feel better about it, but,
Anybody?
you know,
I once had an engineer get on a roof. He bought himself one of those roof bucket safety harness things that he put on, the crotch huggers, with the D-ring on the back, and he attached a rope to the D-ring on the back and handed it to another guy who sat on the ridge and held him from his back. And he kept sliding and hitting his body. He bounced quite a bit.
Like literally, yeah.
Probably happened like 5 times.
It's not
It's
all
clearly
between 11 a.m.
first roof he'd ever been on. He asked me, this guy asked me what I meant by the term
work out
matting.
fast in the morning or at night.
He was the expert.
work out outside of your, so we have.
They denied that claim. This was
Exactly.
early on in my
Put your
career.
body in
Oh, it
stress
pissed me
state.
off. Mercury
Not
insurance.
HGH.
I hated that guy.
So it like doubles and triples your HGH production, which is a huge.
They have to be competent. If they have never done anything roof-related, if they have no roofing credentials whatsoever, no accolades at all that have anything to do with roof surfacing, then they shouldn't be doing anything about roofs. The same could be said for water losses.
So if
If they're a structural engineer and they just got done on their whole tour dealing with concrete bridges,
Yeah.
and suddenly they're looking at racking on a stick-built house. Yeah, they're a structural engineer, but do they have any accolades for that? Do they even know what they're talking about? Maybe not.
Yeah, I took an ice bath.
Maybe they do.
Sleeping by like 10 o'clock.
But maybe they don't. You gotta vet them.
I don't have one on me, bro, but
You can't conceal or withhold anything.
was on there.
And the insurer must not withhold or
give me a
conceal
Facebook, send
information
me a
to them.
DM,
If there is
and then
pertinent information that the engineer would need to know, or if the report comes out, but you know that the insurance adjuster has information that they should have given the engineer, you can ask them to give it to them now and see if they'll do a supplemental report. They'll refuse. And then you have record that you've asked them and that they haven't done it, and now you can hand it off to someone like Sean and they can run with that. That'll be fine. You've done your job. You know, adjusters used to be taught that they're supposed to have an eye towards coverage. Recently, I saw a State Farm, what's their internal policies called? The operational guidelines, the OGs. I saw a State Farm OG, and it said in there, if the defense fails, then provide coverage for this. So they start with defending the policy. If we can't deny it for some reason, then we'll pay for it. That's in their operational guidelines. So clearly they're not looking at things with an eye towards coverage any longer. They're looking at things with an eye towards denial first. So we can't use this to our advantage so much anymore, unless it's an old school guy, and then we can really pull on their heartstrings because they are tired. They probably need to retire. You can't be part of the problem. If you're not doing a full investigation, shame on you. You need to be able to provide a full investigation, a full file. Storm data is probably not going to be in your favor a lot of times because storm data is wildly inaccurate. And so you might need to actually put a detective hat on in order to figure out exactly how things happened even without or despite the storm data. Because all that matters really, they know the storm data is inaccurate. What really matters is whether that storm was capable of producing hail or wind. That's all that really matters. Because no one actually has an anemometer on their roof spinning to determine what the wind speed was on their roof. By the way, it's going to be different from one house to the next based on its pitch. There's something called Bernoulli principle. Based on how close the houses are, based on how many trees there are, based on if it's on a hill, what its altitude is. It's all changing everything. There's too many variables to be able to determine how fast the wind speed was at that address. They have no fucking clue how fast the wind speed was at that address. It's impossible to know unless you're actually tracking it with a weather vane sitting right there. Impossible. Wind speed changes based on the things that it hits. If they're saying hail at this address was 3 inches, guess what? They measured that 18,000 feet up in the air above that address. Does it fall straight down? No. It's going to fall somewhere over here at a completely different address. Makes no sense. So you have to be good at discovering the evidence to build the story. And you need to put that in there. Testimony. Testimony in your file could be, you guys ever heard of the Nextdoor app? This is my favorite. Nextdoor app always has a Karen that is always complaining about the neighbor's tree that is now in their yard right after a wind event. I love those. Wind events just don't show up in storm data. It's stupid, but it doesn't. You could have downbursts with no data whatsoever. None. It will never show up in the storm data. NOAA will never have anything about it because it didn't hit an airport. Does that mean it didn't happen? No. But you have to have some kind of evidence other than the damage, otherwise they're going to call it old damage. Obviously, you need to have coverage. If you guys aren't actually looking for the policy, getting a certified copy to make sure you have all the endorsements and everything there. You need to make sure there's coverage. If you're not doing that part of your job, then I don't know what you're doing here. We teach a 10-step process in the Dealing with Engineers class. I'm not going to teach it in here. I'm actually doing great on time. I have 5 more minutes, I think. Yeah. This is just the list of it. Identify potential defenses. We actually go through a list of defenses, meaning whatever it is that they're going to say is the reason for their denial. That's their defense. We got a wear and tear defense, old damage defense, shit like that. I named these. They're not a real thing. But if you can identify what the denial is going to be in advance, that would make it easier for you to sidestep it, don't you think? So we have a list of all the potential defenses they might take and the types of claims that you might see them on. You could literally print them out, stick them on your wall, and go, all right, here's my claim facts. These are the 3 defenses that are likely to happen to me. And now you know exactly what it is that you need to do in order to sidestep those in beforehand. Because you know what the problems with those defenses are that allows them to use it against you. And you can fill those holes. Head off those potential defenses by sending in all the information once you've identified the problems with them. Pre-game is the things that you do with the engineer and the adjuster once the adjuster says that they're sending out an engineer. Those phone calls you make, the CV, asking the adjuster to ask the engineer to do more things than what they said. Game day is what you do at the time that you're actually meeting with the engineer on site. Should you record? Do you guys record? Okay. Should you tell them you're going to record?
Yes.
I think you should. I think you should notify them well in advance that you're going to be recording. And if they're going to complain about it, good. Pick someone else. Always record. It's an engineer. They're really being sent out to deny the claim. That's the whole purpose. You need to record it. It doesn't mean that you have to be a dick to them, and they might be silent to you, and it's fine. I have recorded every engineer appointment in the last 4 years, and because I'm cool with them, they're cool with me, I'm not a dick to these guys, we still have conversations about weird shit. They're all nerds. Talk about Star Wars and crap. I don't have time to really go through that. Post-game is what you do after the event with the adjuster or the engineer. You know, memorialize all the things that had been said. Make sure that he's got all the documentation again so that he can't say that he didn't get that. And that way, if it's not showing up the report, it's an omission. You'll get the engineer report at some point. Sometimes they won't give it to you. You have to request it. I request in advance. It's part of the pregame. Get a copy of that thing. Go through it. Take a look at all the opinion statements. Take a look at all the fact statements. Do they line up? Are they making opinions outside their competency? Are they saying facts that are actually facts, or are they omitting some things that make those statements? You'll get a denial letter, because once they say no, then they have to give you a denial letter, because you request to get a denial letter, right? And then you know exactly what it is that they're denying and why. I got to tell you this. With a denial letter, do you guys get denial letters? Yeah? Evaluate the language in the denial letter from the policy versus the actual policy language. I have found, and this is a ridiculous thing, 25% of the denial letters that were given to my company had a misrepresentation of the policy language in it. A quarter. That's it. It's a ridiculous amount. And most of the time it's because they didn't apply an endorsement or something. But sometimes it seemed a little bit concerted. Now, I could assume that they did it on purpose. I'd be like, you motherfuckers, you're doing this again? You're trying to screw people? I don't do that. Instead, I go, hey, man, I just got a copy of that denial letter. This kind of stuff happens to me all the time, clerical errors. It looks like that you missed the endorsement that actually changes part of this denial letter language. So I don't want to give this to the policyholder just yet. Do you want to make that change real quick and then shoot me a new thing? Well, actually, maybe you don't want to do that, because with this other language, it actually provides coverage after all. Take a look at it. I'm going to shoot it over to you right now with the actual language, the way it's written. And I'll hold off on going to the policyholder until you get back to me. I've made the assumption that it was a human error. They're more likely to actually make the changes and give me coverage because I gave them the out that they needed to save face. Show your hand is giving them all the shit, and if they still say no, you can create additional leverage in many different ways, or you could hand it off to an attorney and feel really good that you've done your job. These are step-by-step. I know that I haven't given you much information on this. We really go into detail during the class. If you guys are interested, I do that class every now and then. I don't have one scheduled right now. All the hurricane stuff that's going on, honestly, in Florida, our classes have been a little short. So we kind of postponed some stuff to do other things that we're building up for online classes. But I'll have one soon, and I'll post it online, and I'll give you guys a coupon code for being at Mend the Fracture. I'll throw it up on the attorney, public adjuster attorney portal.
Yep.
Always get it wrong. If you guys feel like you have a report that is fraudulent, I would recommend you send it to the American Policyholder Association. I am a board advisor for this group. They are looking to prosecute insurance carrier fraud. One of the most common ways that insurance carrier fraud is perpetrated is through engineer reports. Now, you could send a copy of this to the Attorney General's office yourself, but you could risk some professional backlash. By sending it to an organization like the APA, you kind of insulate yourself from the carriers finding out who sent this in or something along those lines and not suing you or putting you on a blacklist or whatever. I already gave you that. Look, I gave it to you again. Does anybody have any questions? I did a great job if no one has questions. Yeah. Oh, no. There is a question. Thank God. What's up?
Five of the engineer reports finish with one of the snippets of, we reserve the right to amend this report if we, discover or receive any new information.
Engineer reports do usually say something like that.
So,
If you didn't hear, most engineer reports say that they reserve the right to amend their report if new information comes out or something along those lines.
so how do we get them to acknowledge new information?
Well, you can't just send it to the engineer. You literally have to go through this middleman called the adjuster, and the adjuster has to give it to them. Now, if you've already gotten the contact information for the engineer beforehand for the vetting, then you can attach the engineer to the emails that you're sending to the adjuster to give him that additional information. That way it's very clear that you've also sent it to the engineer. But they don't have to do anything with that information until the adjuster asks them to, because the adjuster is our client, or the carrier is our client. So you have to convince the adjuster to ask the engineer for that updated information, and a reasonable adjuster will. Because most adjusters don't realize that engineers are doing this shit. They don't know. They think that the engineers are actually doing the job that they're being sent out to do. They actually believe that they're doing right by the policyholder by sending an engineer out. Most of them. Yeah.
Do you tag them both, email them both?
Policyholder, engineer, and the adjuster, every single time.
And so, one of the reasons is this is supposed to be, sometimes, to give an excuse, like you say, this is supposed to be announced by its reporter.
Right.
And so, there were some elements that were missing, that you recognize.
We noticed that there was, I provided this information to the engineer earlier. It didn't seem to make it in the report. I believe it actually will change the results of the report. I want to make sure that they get this in their hands because I think it'll actually amend their conclusions. Can you please make sure that the engineer takes a look at this information that I previously sent them? Really harp on that. I sent it to him before like 4 times, the bastard. But don't say it like that. And just see if you can get the adjuster to ask the engineer to do a supplemental report. It's very hard for an engineer to admit they're wrong, though. If they do that, it could actually look bad on the engineer. And their management is likely to kind of force them to not change their opinion. But you still have to go through that process, really teeing it up for an attorney most of the time. But a reasonable one will change their opinion. I have had many, many engineer reports overturned just by asking these kind of questions. Probably like 70%. Definitely not all of them.
Used to be like October in Rhode Island, but they decided to move it into the first part of with Nephew's mid-year meeting, so it's going to be first week of December in Boston.
Shit, I gotta have surgery.
What do you get?
Yeah, obligation.
Herniated disc, that's why I'm all
Which one? What level is it?
L4.
Yeah, my L4, L5 was called 8 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
But they did epidural steroid injections.
got the injection, but mine's, so a bulge is when it's pushed.
Part of the pregame that I do in the steps is talk about what it is that you talk to the engineer about beforehand. A lot of this I do over the phone because it seems really
Sure I don't get kicked off the site.
confrontational in writing.
Well, I've been renewing my dues, but I gotta take.
Hey, man, heard you're on my job.
Yeah.
I heard that you're one of the better engineers that really works within the constraints that you have. I know your guys' job is very hard sometimes because you have people pushing from both sides, but I heard you really do everything you can for people, so I really appreciate that about you, really taking care of everybody in an ethical manner. There's so many engineers out there that don't follow the NSPE code of ethics. I've just told him that I'm aware of the code of ethics without saying you better fucking follow the code of ethics, right? There's ways that you can talk to these people that you can label them as the good guy. They'll want to live up to that without being a dick.
There was a bunch of engine expert guys that were.
There's ways to talk to some of these guys. As long as you can actually get their contact information, that's the hard part. Any other questions? Cool. Next. All right.